So when I've looked around online, something I've noticed is that there is this idea floating around that if you explain yourself or explain anything to someone else, that you are inherently giving away your power. And to me, this is a very strange idea, actually. I don't really understand where it's coming from, because the basic foundation of any relationship of any kind, I don't just mean romantic or familial or friendly, I also mean in workplaces as well. If you won't explain anything, how can the people around you possibly understand your expectations? If you won't explain your expectations, how can anyone ever meet them? And it's worth noting that no one's your slave. Nobody exists simply to meet your expectations. I think, particularly in workplaces, this can get confusing because we live in a society where we're used to the traditional hierarchy of the bosses or the landowners having power over their servants. But it's worth noting that there's nothing inherent to that transaction that requires disrespect or that requires any form of, threatening behavior or threats of, some sort of harm to the other person. And I mean, personally, when I see an employer threatening their employees, that's a huge red flag for me. It's beyond a red flag. It's the problem. Your employees certainly are selling you their time and their labor, and therefore, if they are not giving you their time and their labor, they are cheating you. You are right to have reservations about that. But by the same token, if you're going to treat them in a dehumanizing fashion, you have to expect that they will cease to cooperate with you. They've lost all reason to cooperate with you because there is no more respect in that relationship anymore. What you're letting them know is that you are more interested in dehumanizing them than you are in actually understanding the real day-to-day challenges of the career that they're performing for you. I think the biggest misunderstanding people have in the world of careers is possibly the idea that front-facing staff have an easy job, which they do not. It turns out that, and I used to think this myself, before I went into retail, I thought, oh, it's so simple. People come to you and they buy their things and, you process the transaction and you clean the shop and it's easy. And in some ways it is that way, but in other ways it's very much not. And there is this constant psychological pressure that comes out of having to, for the entire duration that you are doing your job, you have a responsibility to essentially put on a small play. You're putting on a constant performance of being a smiley, happy person who exists to serve and do nothing else for the customer. And there are caveats to that. I'm very glad that in recent times there is an increasing amount of employers who will display signs telling the customers that it is unacceptable to threaten the staff or to be verbally abusive. And I would be very glad if that became entirely normalized. But there is still employers themselves out there who will threaten and abuse their employees and think that that's fair game. And, I put this video up at massive risk to myself in some ways because I am a retail worker. So in putting this video online, I am sort of putting a little bit of a sort of target on my back, really, because there's a lot of employers who may view this video and think that I am a layabout and somebody who doesn't really want to do their job. Anybody who has actually worked with me will tell you that's absolutely not the case. But the thing is, and the thing is, I actually push myself to go above and beyond when I'm working, which is precisely why it frustrates me so much when I see employers participating in intimidation tactics. Because what I've found within myself is that those sorts of intimidation tactics don't work. At least within myself, I know for a fact that whenever an employer is intimidating me, what I find is that I'm no longer just thinking about how do I do this job to the best of my ability. I go from that pattern of thought to thinking, oh no, this person's going to hurt me if they even remotely misinterpret my actions or my behavior or my words. And it typically has the result of making me less likely to take any concerns or issues to them. It has the effect of prompting me to think that I should possibly look for other employment. It does create distance. And distance is a good thing. Sometimes, people do need to establish boundaries with one another. But a distance created by hostility in a workplace doesn't serve anybody. The only thing that it can contribute to is burnout, which, if you do your research, you'll find in the retail industry, burnout is a massive issue. Retail burnout is a huge problem. And, so to simply carte blanche blame the employees doesn't take into the full account of how hard their job really is. Because the whole time they're not just having to do this performance, they're having to deal with all of the different things that you as an employer, if you are watching this, or any employer will ask of them. They have to constantly keep the whole retail environment perfectly tidy, even though customers, of course, as they're looking through things, will naturally rummage and displace everything. They have to constantly serve the customers perfectly and answer all of the customers' inquiries instantly and serve all of the customers as efficiently as possible. They have all of these responsibilities to think about. And, speaking as somebody who takes those responsibilities very seriously, yes, I don't really understand the need for the intimidation, because my thought is, this place has hired me for this specific labor. So why does psychological warfare need to enter the picture? And I would even go so far as to say, if you are finding that your team is not doing what you expect, as a rule, psychological warfare is not going to improve that situation. If your staff are underachieving or underperforming because they don't understand your expectations, or because they lack the resources they need for doing their job appropriately, or perhaps because the goals you've set for them are unachievable, or due to some other factor in the retail environment that they haven't been able to tell you about, you threatening them is not going to make it easier for them to communicate those concerns. It's going to make it harder. They're going to be much less likely to talk to you about what's actually happening and why they're underperforming. And this is all the worse in retail environments where staff might actually be communicating with their managers about what's needed for doing the job effectively, and the managers or the bosses are just ignoring them. If you will not provide the resources that your staff need to do the job properly, you have to expect that they will underperform. And you might want to believe that you might have come from a background yourself. In fact, it certainly will be the case, because the vast majority of us over the age of 30 were raised this way, with this idea that if you just push someone hard enough, they will just perform better. But I will invite you to ask yourself, was that really helpful to you? Really ask yourself, in the times when people pushed you and in situations where you were underperforming because you didn't have enough information or because you didn't have the resources you needed, did them pushing you actually help the situation, or did it just make you feel terrible? Did it actually just exhaust you and demoralize you and make you less likely to reach out for the help and support you needed? Did it make you less likely to engage with the task? Did it make you less interested in actually doing the thing that they were telling you to do? And I'm going to hazard a guess that you probably found their behavior completely unhelpful because it wasn't relevant to the actual problem at hand. And I think it's a similar thing with your staff. They applied for the job. They, agreed to the position. If they aren't performing, you do need to take some time to find out why. You actually need to talk to them. Maybe even issue a survey that they can answer anonymously so that they can be direct and honest about why they're underperforming. And then you might actually begin to see some results, because ideally retail teams should be a team. You should be all on the same page with the same goals and objectives of wanting to, do the best you can for the store, because if everyone's working hard, making the shop the best that it can be, making sure that the customers are having a great time and coming back, that's good for everybody. Everybody wins in that case, because customers coming in means that everybody has a chance for improvement in their careers, in their quality of life as a consequence. That desire to work together and make things better is important. And it's something that I think anybody who is part of a team will have deep down, but there does need to be a willingness to communicate about it.